Hey guys, welcome back to my channel for another video. I have been chewing on really philosophically dense topics lately, and I've been thinking about the INFJ personality and why we are social chameleons. I think if you guys were anything like me growing up, I always felt like my identity was almost like a used name sticker that I would try to pop on, and it just kept falling off like every time I was in a new crowd, and I would lose myself to the crowd. And I also felt like I was just so complex. It was so hard for me to come up with like a set of attributes that could really describe me. So I wanted to address why a lot of INFJs, I think, feel that way, and what we can do about it so that we can feel more comfortable in our own skin. So that's what this video today is about. So the latest thing that I've been really nerding out on recently has been Carl Jung and like his original writings. We should all know and love Carl Jung because he's like the original founder of the cognitive functions, which later evolved into MBTI. Carl Jung also saw a sense of self as being like extremely complex. He has his own like diagram of what a self really is and like a model of the human psyche that is composed of 5 different archetypes. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm just going to walk through each of these archetypes which compose a sense of self, talk about that from an INFJ standpoint of self-development and just what we can do to become stronger in ourselves. So the first major archetype, according to Carl Jung, is the persona. And this is the most superficial layer of the self and is characterized by being like the masks that people wear, depending on the social environment that they're in. And I think every person acts as a social chameleon on some level. We all have to like adapt to whatever environment that we're in. But INFJs tend to feel this at a much deeper level than most. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I think the first being that we tend to be like hyper vigilant of behavior. We have like hyperactive mirror neurons and we pick up on the smallest of social cues. So it's almost like no matter what, we see like the deepest core layers of people and what they're actually thinking and feeling despite what they're trying to be perceived as. And then I think the second reason is because we tend to be very deep people, very contemplative, and really like to get into the deepest layers of the mind. We tend to avoid very superficial social settings and not enjoy them very often. For me personally, as far as self-development goes, I sort of came to an understanding that not every person in this life needs to know you at a very deep level. And I used to internalize like me being misunderstood as as my own fault. The reality is that in this life, I think you'll probably only have maybe a couple relationships who know you at a deeper level, and that's okay. So the next major archetype is the ego, and this is in the realm of conscious awareness. It is your sense of I am and like the identity that you would go by. This can be like titles you give yourself, attributes, things of that nature. And this is the level that a lot of INFJs really struggle with. I think that's why MBTI is such a heaven sent for us. And I think one of the major reasons for that is because of the nature of introverted intuition, which is your imagination. I think the way that I felt this in my own life was that I often felt like I had this like infinite imagination and only a finite way to express it. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, it just seems like you often end up either becoming expressionless or turning your FE function up full volume and just sort of adapting to the environment that you're in and losing your sense of self. So it seems pretty universal in a lot of the INFJ channels that I've come across, a very common theme at least, that a lot of us grow up kind of denying and repressing our intuitive function and then become adaptive and socialized to mainstream society, we'll say. And then because of that, we really suffer and grow miserable. I think anytime you're denying any aspect of yourself, that's like a recipe for disaster. So this is kind of an interesting segue into the next 3 archetypes, moving from the realm of the conscious into the unconscious. And I would say that for anybody who like wants to unlock these layers of self and come back to a place of like the fullness of who you are, you kind of have to go through a 3-fold process, which is kind of painful, honestly, because the first thing that you have to go through is suffering. You have to be like tired and fed up with your egoic identity and realizing that it's not fulfilling to you, which leads into number 2, like some form of surrender and repentance. And then number 3, death to self, which is like shedding your egoic identity and being willing to accept the truth no matter the cost to your ego. So that's kind of the process that leads you into the realm of your deepest self. So moving into the realm of the personal subconscious. The next major archetype is the shadow, and the shadow is characterized by being any unconscious, repressed, or disowned parts of yourself. the main premise of this one is that your like personal microcosm is projected out onto the external macrocosm. And the things that you judge about other people are typically things that you don't want to see inside of yourself. So this is probably the most important archetype to get to know if you're doing any type of self-development process. It's extremely important. And I just have a couple of things that I want to point out on this one for INFJs. I think the first one being that the shadow is the realm of facing really hard truths about yourself and things that you don't want to see. And I think the way that this can show up in the life of an INFJ is that we tend to want to be seen as good and helpful and like empaths, very altruistic people. But if you're somebody who wants to be seen as good, oftentimes what happens is you can be denying or disowning when you're actually being very selfish and don't want to see that part of yourself, putting on altruistic masks as like a means to your end, whatever that may be. And I think another way that this might show up is maybe like a devil who masquerades in light. It's not uncommon for INFJs to be like spiritual teachers. And this could be like the type of person who stands at the pulpit. They share beautiful spiritual truths, but maybe treats their family terribly and, or like their personal relationships are not very good. So that's one way that that can show up in the life of an INFJ. So the next major point of the shadow is that it is not always like things that you deem to be negative. It can also be like really positive attributes that you just don't see or acknowledge fully. And I think the way that this shows up in an INFJ personality is that we often get characterized as like being walking contradictions in a variety of ways. And we can feel like very polarized and like we have extremes in our personality. And the way that you are able to like sort of come to a healthy medium between two extremes of yourself is by doing shadow work. Something about doing that allows you to live in like a healthy medium of both extremes. So I think it's really important for INFJs to do shadow work, and I'm not going to go into detail in this video, but that is definitely one way that can help you sort of crystallize your sense of beingness in this world and helps you be a little less disorienting if you feel like you're all over the place with your personality. So the fourth major archetype is the Anima and the Animus. And this is a very complex and mysterious archetype. I'm still kind of reading about it and it's been kind of hard for me to digest, so I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert on it. But my understanding is that it's kind of like the soul image inside of every person. The way that Carl Jung wrote about it was that the Anima was like the soul image inside of a man, and the Animus was the soul image inside of a woman. So Carl Jung's writings on this are kind of interesting because he almost makes it seem like you have to go through a rite of passage to be able to reach this part of your psyche, and you need to have done like a significant amount of shadow work in order to unlock this part of yourself. And he makes it sound like it's this almost like a separate entity inside of who you are. It's very complex, but I think for most people it involves like confronting any type of wounds that you might have related to your mother or father figure. If you've been on this individuation path for any amount of time, you will definitely confront this soul image, either internally, like through a dream, or externally through something like a twin flame, is kind of what it sounds like. Somebody that you sort of project your soul image onto, and is usually kind of a toxic relationship. So that's been really interesting for me to read about recently because I sort of had that happen to me after I did a few years of shadow work. So the way that this relates to the INFJ personality is that your Anima or your Animus is almost like the key, like the gateway to the collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious is like where all of our deepest level symbols and like archetypes and like storytelling themes that sort of resonate with people at very deep levels. So INFJs have like an uncanny knack for being able to see like metaphors and symbolism and being able to use that in like writing or whatever form of communication that you do, like artwork or speeches. We have this ability to like reach people at their deepest layers through like employing these types of symbolism. So yeah, this archetype is like the gateway to your creative center. So the last major archetype is the self. And this is who you become after you've done shadow work and integrated all of the disowned parts of yourself. And once you've formed a relationship with your Anima or your Animus, it is like your crystallized sense of being, uniting your conscious and your unconscious. So I think the goal, according to Carl Jung, on this individuation path of like self-actualizing, is that you want to become whole, embracing of your imperfections, becoming like a multidimensional person. And I think as an INFJ, that's something that's kind of encouraging because we tend to be very strong perfectionists and always want to be seen a certain way. So I think it's kind of a very important mind shift to have, in that you just want to become a whole person and walk through this world with a strong identity, accepting your flaws and all the parts of you that fall short sometimes, and that's okay. So I have infinite thoughts on this, but that's all I got for now. And I think self-development is kind of a bottomless pit of things, and there's always more to discover. So please drop in the comments your guys' thoughts and your INFJ experience being a chameleon. I look forward to hearing about it. So I will see you all next time, and have a good week.